The city was alive, but she felt dead inside. Emily Carter stood alone beneath the flickering streetlight at the edge of the Williamsburg Bridge. The wind cut through her thin coat like it hated her, and the cold rain had long since soaked through to her skin. But she didn't flinch. Not from the storm. Not from the world. Below her, the East River surged, dark and indifferent. She clutched the rusted railing with numb fingers, her breaths shallow, ragged. People passed behind her, heads down, too distracted or too afraid to look too long. It didn't matter. No one really saw her anyway. Not anymore. Her life had slowly unraveled. A toxic relationship that left her hollow, a job that crumbled beneath her feet, a sense of self-worth stripped away by years of pretending she was okay. She had held on for as long as she could. But tonight felt like the end. Then came a voice. Quiet. Steady. Just behind her. Hey, I don't want to scare you. I just noticed you looked like you might need someone. She turned her head slightly, startled. A man, mid-30s, water dripping from his dark hair, stood a few feet away. His eyes weren't invasive, just open. Kind. I'm not here to stop you, he added, his voice thick with empathy. But I can sit with you. If that's okay. Emily said nothing. Her throat burned with unshed tears. She wanted to scream, to tell him to leave, but some fragile part of her, the part that still hoped, ached for his presence. So he sat. Right there, on the cold concrete, in the middle of the storm. Not asking anything of her. Not offering cliches. Just being there. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Finally, she collapsed to the ground beside him, not from defeat, but from the first flicker of relief she'd felt in months. That night, she didn't end her life. And he never asked for her name. Before the bridge, Emily Carter's life had already been unraveling. She'd once been a bright spark, an English major with dreams of publishing poetry and teaching literature. She had loved rainy days in bookstores and coffee shops that played soft jazz. But after college, reality hit harder than expected. The publishing internship she'd pinned her hopes on turned into unpaid labor. Her poetry submissions were routinely rejected. And the man she thought loved her, the one who promised they'd build a life together, gradually became someone unrecognizable. It started with little things. The comments that chipped away at her confidence, the way he rolled his eyes when she talked about teaching, the nights he disappeared without explanation. Then came the emotional manipulation, the guilt trips, the silent treatment, the constant gaslighting that made her question her worth. By the time he left her, he'd not only taken her savings, but most of her belief in herself. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Brooklyn, surviving on substitute teaching jobs and canned soup. Some days she didn't get out of bed. Others, she walked the city until her legs gave out, trying to outrun the ache in her chest. Her friends had stopped calling. Her phone stayed silent. Her journal pages stayed blank. No one noticed when she stopped showing up. And she began to wonder if her absence would matter at all. Miles away, in the heart of Manhattan, Noah Bennett was saving lives, but forgetting how to live his own. At 35, he was respected and admired as an emergency room doctor. Calm under pressure. Brilliant with patience. The guy you called when everything went wrong. But beneath his steady demeanor was a heart heavy with its own grief. Years ago, when he was just out of med school, Noah lost his younger sister, Claire, to suicide. She had been the sunshine of their family, the one who could light up any room. And yet, no one had seen how much she was hurting. Especially not Noah. He blamed himself for not noticing. For being too busy. For thinking she'd be okay. Since then, he'd made it his mission to notice. Every patient. Every subtle cue. Every silent cry behind tired eyes. But while he poured himself into others, his own soul stayed empty. Relationships never lasted. His friends joked he was married to the hospital. And in a way, he was, because the noise of the kept the quiet in his heart from getting too loud. He didn't believe in fate. He believed in showing up, paying attention, and doing something when it mattered. So when he saw the woman standing on the bridge that rainy night, something in him couldn't keep walking. He didn't know her story. Didn't need to. He just knew what it looked like when someone was right on the edge. Dash dash dash. In the days after that night, Emily felt like she'd woken up from a fog. The man hadn't tried to fix her. He hadn't lectured or questioned. He'd just been there, in the raw, painful stillness, without judgment. And somehow, that presence, that patience, had changed everything. She started writing again. Not poems, not at first, just fragments. Letters. Unsent words to a stranger who didn't even know her name. She filled notebooks with them. You didn't try to drag me away from the edge. You sat beside me and reminded me I wasn't invisible. With time, she started substitute teaching again. Then part-time classes at a community college. Eventually, she found a rhythm, modest, quiet, but real. Her apartment remained small, her life simple, but it was hers. She even rescued a dog, a shy terrier named Luna, who seemed just as uncertain about second chances. But she never stopped thinking about the man on the bridge. Sometimes she wondered if he had been an angel. Other times, just a stranger whose heart was brave enough to care. She didn't know his name, but she carried his kindness with her, like a light she could return to on the darkest days. Dash dash dash. For Noah, the memory of her lingered too. He didn't expect anything in return for that night. But he found himself hoping she'd made it. That she'd walked away from the edge not just in body, but in spirit. And even though he had no way of knowing, he believed she had. Because sometimes, when you offer a hand to someone in the dark, you never get to see where they go. But you hope it's toward the light. Rain softened to mist, but neither of them moved. Emily remained still, crouched beside him on the cold pavement, her soaked hair clinging to her cheeks, her tears hidden by the storm. The man beside her, this stranger, sat silently, his presence steady and unshakable. He didn't ask for her name. He didn't ask her what she was doing there. He simply gave her space. A sacred, silent space to exist without judgment. Minutes passed, and still, he waited. Finally, she whispered, barely audible over the hush of the wind, "Why did you stop?" He looked at her, his eyes calm and direct. "Because I've been there." She turned toward him, startled. She hadn't expected honesty. Not like that. "My sister," he continued, his voice breaking just slightly, "took her life 6 years ago. She was standing in a place like this. Only no one stopped for her." The rawness in his voice cut through the cold. "I didn't want that to happen again," he said. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at her hands, trembling in her lap. "I wasn't going to jump," she lied. He didn't call her out. Didn't press. "Okay," he said gently. "Then I'm glad I still stopped." That was the moment something shifted inside her. The walls she'd built, the bitterness, the shame, the numbness, they cracked. Not because someone tried to fix her. But because someone saw her. Not as a problem. Not as a burden. But as a person worth pausing for. She wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she whispered. "There's nothing wrong with you," he said softly. "You're hurting. That's not weakness. That's human." The rain slowed to a drizzle. A car passed behind them, headlights casting long shadows. The world continued, unaware. But on that bridge, something sacred was happening. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said, shifting slightly to face her. "But I just want you to know, this moment doesn't have to be the end. It could be the start of something different." Her voice shook. "But what if I'm too far gone?" He shook his head. "You're still here. That means there's still a chance." A long silence followed. Then she did something she hadn't done in months. She let herself cry. And he didn't flinch. He stayed, his body warm beside hers, his presence unwavering. Eventually, she wiped her face with her sleeve and gave him a soft, broken laugh. "You don't even know my name. You don't have to tell me," he said. "Unless you want to." She hesitated, then looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time that night, she saw something gentle in herself reflected in someone else. Emily, she said quietly. He smiled. I'm Noah. They shook hands like old friends. And then, in a gesture so small yet so significant, he stood and offered her his jacket. You don't have to be alone tonight, he said. I can walk you somewhere safe. She paused, heart pounding. This wasn't a romantic gesture. It was something more rare. It was safe. It was kind. She took the jacket. They walked side by side through quiet streets, neither saying much. The weight of her decision lingered, but it didn't feel so suffocating anymore. Because now, someone knew. Someone cared. And that changed everything. He didn't ask for her number. Didn't make promises. But before they parted, he said, You matter, Emily. Don't forget that. And then he was gone. Just like that. A single moment doesn't always fix everything. But sometimes, it gives you just enough air to breathe again. For Emily, that night on the bridge became a quiet turning point. She didn't wake up the next morning healed or whole. She still cried in the shower. Still felt lost in crowded rooms. But something was different, she didn't feel invisible anymore. Someone had seen her pain and stayed. That knowing gave her courage. She began journaling again, each page a release of things she could never say aloud. Some days, she wrote letters to Noah she'd never send. Others, she scribbled fragments of poems, letting pain bleed into beauty. She adopted a morning routine. Wake up, walk Luna, sip black coffee by the window, and write something. Even one sentence. The ritual grounded her. Eventually, she applied for a full-time position at the local community college teaching creative writing. She didn't expect to get it. But she did. Her classroom became a space for second chances, for students who had struggled like her, for quiet kids unsure of their voices, for anyone who needed someone to believe in them. Every semester, she shared a single story with her students, without names, without details, the story of a stranger who once sat beside her on a rainy night and told her she mattered. I didn't need him to rescue me, she would say. I just needed someone to see me. Her students always sat in silence afterward. Some cried. One young woman came to her after class and whispered, You don't know how much I needed to hear that today. Emily just smiled. I didn't know how much I needed it either, until someone said it to me. Across the city, Noah carried on in the chaos of the He never knew what became of the woman from the bridge. He often thought about her, especially on difficult nights, when patients came in broken, bleeding, or too far gone. Her name lingered in the back of his mind, Emily. He never forgot the way her eyes had looked that night, haunted but searching, like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff but still hoping for a reason not to jump. He hoped she found that reason. Sometimes, when he passed the bridge after a long shift, he'd pause and glance out at the skyline. And sometimes, he'd whisper her name to the wind, not expecting an answer, but sending hope anyway. Noah didn't talk about his sister much anymore. But that night had healed something in him too. For the first time since Claire died, he didn't feel powerless in the face of pain. Because he had done what no one did for her. He showed up. 5 years later. It was a rainy Tuesday when Emily walked into the holding a nervous teenage student by the hand. The girl had collapsed during class, panic attack, maybe more. Emily had driven her herself. As they waited in the intake hallway, a familiar voice echoed down the corridor. Ms. Carter. Emily turned, heart skipping. There he was. Noah. Older now, tired eyes, scruffy jaw, but still steady. Still the calm in the storm. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the hospital disappeared. Recognition bloomed slowly across his face. Emily. He asked softly, as if saying her name might break the moment. She nodded, breath catching. Noah. Neither of them moved for a second. Then, awkwardly, instinctively, they hugged. It wasn't long, but it was enough to say, I remember. I'm still here. He looked at her, then at the student beside her. Is she yours? Emily smiled gently. She's one of mine. He nodded, something warm flickering in his eyes. Once the student was taken to a room, Noah returned to the waiting area. Emily was sitting alone now, rain still clinging to her coat. You okay? He asked, gently. She looked up. Better than I was 5 years ago. He laughed softly. Me too. There was a pause. Then she asked, did you ever think about that night? All the time, he replied, without hesitation. I hoped you made it. I hoped you were okay. I did, she whispered. Because of you. The hospital had quieted. The rhythmic beep of machines, the low murmur of nurses, life moving forward in controlled chaos. Emily sat near the vending machine, hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee. It had been hours since her student had been admitted. The girl was stable now, shaken, but safe. She felt a weight beside her and turned. Noah sat down, still wearing his scrubs, his hands streaked faintly with sanitizer and ink. He looked tired. But he was smiling. I can't believe it's really you, he said. I used to wonder if you were real, Emily said with a soft laugh. For years, I thought maybe I imagined you. That night felt like a dream. I wondered about you, too, he admitted. I never asked your last name. I didn't want to push you. But I hoped. His voice trailed off, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. I'm glad you didn't push, Emily said. You didn't save me from something that night. You saved me to something. To life. To this version of me who gets to help others. He looked at her, really looked, and something tender passed between them, unspoken but understood. That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me, he said. She smiled, eyes brimming. It's true. I never forgot what you said, that being here means there's still a chance. That changed everything. Noah exhaled deeply. You know, I think I needed to hear it, too. I always felt like I failed my sister. Like I was too late. But you were my second chance. Their eyes met. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased. After that night, I wrote something down. I don't even know why. I guess I just needed to believe it meant something. He handed it to her. Emily unfolded the paper slowly. In Noah's uneven scrawl, it read, you won't always get to see the garden that blooms from the seed you plant. But plant it anyway. Tears welled up in her eyes. I became the garden, she whispered. And you've helped others grow, too, he said gently. A beat passed. The air between them shimmered with a quiet, powerful peace. He cleared his throat. So, listen. I don't know what your life looks like now, and I don't want to assume anything. But would you, maybe want to get coffee sometime? A real one. Not this vending machine disaster. Emily laughed through her tears. I'd like that. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the climax of a fairy tale. But it was real. Later that week, they met at a cozy little cafe tucked between a bookstore and a park. It was raining again, just like that night. But this time, neither of them felt lost. They talked for hours. About the past. About grief. About second chances. And when they stepped outside, umbrella-less and soaked once again, Noah reached out, tucked a strand of wet hair behind Emily's ear, and said with a smile, I'm really glad I stopped that night. She looked at him, heart full. So am I. And for the first time in a long time, she believed in something new, not just in survival, but in love.